Welcome to Brainthropology. Let's talk about our amazing brain and the issues that get us stuck. We all have those moments where life gets overwhelming. It can be related to injury or illness, or an issue with your kids, or just because life is crazy and we need a little help and encouragement. Our team of therapists, expert guests, and clients are here to deep dive into the topics that matter most. We will share information with our listeners that encourages, educates, and empowers.
This episode is brought to you by Galaxy Brain and Therapy Center, helping clients live their best lives by implementing strategies such as those discussed in this podcast. Galaxy Brain and Therapy Center is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, serving southeastern Michigan for in-person and community-based services. Out-of-state virtual and teletherapy services available for OT, PT, speech, mental health, and mindfulness. Check out their website at galaxybraincenter.com. Welcome to this week's episode of Brainthropology. I'm Courtney Wang, and I'm here today with Meg Scaling. And our topic today is self-advocacy.
It is, and Courtney, this is one of your passion projects, and I think you have done such an incredible job helping clients you've treated practice self-advocacy. And I really want to ask you some questions today, and you are just so insightful on this. What exactly is self-advocacy? How would you define self-advocacy?
Well, self-advocacy is letting other people know your needs and speaking up in a way that can allow them to accommodate your needs. I'm so passionate about it because there are so many situations where your mom or your dad might be with you sometimes, but they're not going to be with you always. Your caregiver, if you've had an injury, they might be with you most of the time, but there are times you're going to need to speak up for yourself. It's for your safety and it's for your quality of life, and it's extremely important. It's a skill that you can learn. So if we can learn this skill together, you can take on the world. You can tell people your needs and it can be accommodated.
And it starts young. Like when I think of self-advocacy, I think of making my child order their own meal at a breakfast diner and forcing them to talk to someone and tell them what they want.
That's bringing up their confidence, right? We need to build our kids' ability to speak to an adult, to speak to a peer and tell them what they need. And then that plays into someone's been mean to me at school and my kids come home and we role play that situation. Mom, so-and-so did this to me on the playground. And then we role play, well, you need to tell them to stop. It's not okay to say those things to me. If you continue to do this, then I'm going to get someone else to help me in this situation. And when a kid speaks to another kid that way, the kids stop. They're not going to keep going because they know my girls, they mean business when it comes to this advocacy thing.
And I think self-advocacy starts with that sense of confidence and that ability to make a decision for yourself and that ability to interject your opinion. And I think you've done such a great job raising your girls. In fact, we were all out together last night and one of our coworkers commented after you left about how delightful your kids are and how they can carry in a conversation with an adult and how they're able to just express their feelings and be confident about what they want. What is your parenting trick that you have done in raising your kids to raise such amazing self-advocates?
My key philosophy in parenting is that I'm raising future adults. And I am not going to be there in the way that I am right now when they are adults. And so it's baby steps every single day. I took them to a therapy appointment this morning and we went to a coffee shop beforehand. I rehearsed with them on the side. What do you want to eat? What do you want to say? Okay, now you're going to make eye contact with this lady and you're going to tell her what you want. And when the lady asks you questions, they'll look at me and I just pause and I say, you've got this. And building that confidence to know that they can speak to an adult. But this is essential in a world where it's not always kind to our children, that they can feel comfortable to speak up. But this works so well for someone who has had an injury as well. It shakes your confidence. All of a sudden, you don't feel like yourself anymore. And knowing that you can have that confidence in learning the words to say or the piece of paper to hand someone, because sometimes advocacy is not spoken.
And sometimes it's because you have a congenital issue or a disease or a disorder that has affected your ability to participate in the world the way everyone else does. And it could be a learning disability. It could be you're other. There's something other about you that isn't even a disability. It's not even a label, but there's something other about you that requires you to speak up for yourself.
And I think all of us can use self-advocacy. You don't need to have a child or you don't need to have an injury to need to advocate for yourself in life. I'm learning as an adult that I feel very confident with myself and I'm willing to let things go. But as a parent, I've learned the lesson of sometimes I don't get to let it go anymore. And I've had to work on my ability to advocate for my children in different ways. And it's grown me as an adult and as a therapist, where my child's in this situation. I can't expect them to walk away and let things bounce off like they would for me. They need to see me say, that's not okay. You can't do this in this situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Parent modeling, being able to model saying no, being able to model that self-advocacy for your own self-care and have self-compassion. And if you're overwhelmed, saying yes to everything isn't good either. So being able to advocate for yourself and say, you know what, I can't take on one more thing. And this is why. So let's get back to self-advocacy has 3 key elements. What are the 3 key elements to self-advocacy?
I think the first is actually the hardest. It's understanding your own needs. Because sometimes you know that this isn't working, but you need to actually identify that fix. And that can actually be one of the hardest pieces. And then you need to be able to communicate that need to someone in a way that they can hear it. I have a theory that most people want to help you, but they don't always know how. And so sitting down and telling someone how to help you is absolutely the best way to do that. I was speaking with a client yesterday who had a very challenging week. Her mother-in-law had passed. She felt completely overwhelmed in every facet of life. I walked in the door. She just literally tackled me with a bear hug. And we sat down and she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, okay, let's identify what your needs are right now. And we realized that she was struggling with meal prep. She couldn't keep up now taking care of 2 homes and all these different things. So we came up with a situation where we said we needed someone to come and just have a play date with her daughter. We needed her daughter to have a space so that she had room for her feelings. And so we wrote down a list of all of those different needs. And then we figured out what kind of support that need would have. So overwhelmed with having her daughter there in that space, let's ask someone to come and actually take her out of the house for a little while. But then communicating with someone in a way that they can hear it so that they can offer you that help. And you're letting those people who were just so eager, everyone was flooding her with text of how do I help? And we had a list of saying, yes, you can, and here's how. And all of those friends leapt on that situation. And it was such a success in that day, knowing that her needs were met because she said yes and then told them how.
And she also said yes to seeing you, because part of understanding your needs is talking with a therapist to figure out what are my needs. And I think we're always figuring out our needs, and we're always challenged with emotional situations that come up. And I think in our life development, our needs change from the time we're toddlers to the time we're teenagers to the time we're in our 20s, and our life situations change to the time I'm in my 40s. I'm seeing a therapist because I'm in my 40s and my needs are changing. And there's no shame in saying that it's so important to find someone that you can talk to that helps you identify those needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can have the most amazing spouses, family members, friends, and all of those things. But professional help during certain times of life, you can't replace someone having such a deep knowledge in one area to help you along.
Yeah, and asking you the questions that maybe you are afraid to ask yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are some situations where people might need to advocate for themselves or for others?
I think one that a lot of people around school age kids would recognize is advocating for your kids in a school situation, learning how to go through and identify what your kids' needs are so that they can get the most out of their learning experience, and then communicating those needs to the school in a way that it gets your kids the services that they need. Here in Michigan, we've had a major advocacy need with the auto no fault changes. And that's like a big organized push now to try to get some of the services back for people who paid into contracts for years to get these services. And now they've been taken away from them with some laws that had changed. So people getting together and advocating in those situations. On a smaller level, if I have an injury and I go to the gym for a workout, I need to advocate for myself in that moment. I sprained my ankle. I will not do any running, but I can sit down and do arm exercises. I can do other different things, but I can't do anything on my left foot today. And letting those people know that and knowing what you could do and asking for their help to maybe modify a workout for you so that you can participate fully. There's so many different areas that we can use this advocacy tool.
Absolutely. I think about my child with type 1 diabetes who was diagnosed at the age of 4. And so it was a situation where I had to train her to advocate for herself. Not only does she have to understand her body awareness and when her sugars are high or low, but she also has to figure out how is she going to tell her friends, because when she was young and before she was on a pump, she was insulin dependent on needles, and she had to leave the class multiple times to get insulin. And so initially the choice that she made was, I am going to talk to my friends about this. And we brought in a big container of syringe needles, and she was in about second grade. And we were just going to tell people, this is why Sarah leaves the class. And yes, she has diabetes. Yes, she has to take shots. Yes, she has to poke her finger and check her blood sugars. But it's not contagious, and she's still healthy, and she's okay, and you don't have to worry about her. And as her psychological needs changed and as she developed, she became less and less comfortable sharing that story. And so I think when we went and shared that story in 4th grade, she was angry with me. We did it 2nd grade, we did it 3rd grade. By 4th grade, she was like, Mom, I cannot believe you made me do this again. And I was, as a parent, I'm like, oh, I thought this was our plan. I thought this was the helpful thing. And she was at the phase in life where she didn't want anyone to know. This was her thing. It was her personal matter. No, she didn't need to describe it to anyone. And it wasn't until she had a traumatic event, probably her freshman year, where kids found out about it and approached her in a really aggressive way. And she lied. She's like, no, I don't have diabetes. She was just like thrown really off by it. And it took time to kind of work through where now she's in a senior in high school, and she's getting ready to try and play college soccer. And she'll wear her continuous glucose monitor on her bare arm, and she doesn't care. But the point of this story is, the advocacy needs change, and her needs changed from the time she was a child to the time she was in early elementary to the time she was in high school. And as a parent, you have to be always checking in. And I guess don't assume that what worked early on is going to work as your child develops.
And I think that's a beautiful story of advocacy, because not only did you model for her advocacy, you also probably looked out for a lot of kids who you never even met who had type 1 diabetes, because you were educating whole classrooms in that scenario. And it's amazing that you guys could come together and not just make her comfortable and share that with the class, but that was looking out for other kids who are going to come and walk in her footsteps. But then acknowledging the fact that that changed so much, that's really hard for us as parents, because our babies are our babies. And when they keep shifting on us, dang it, like we have to keep up with them and these developmental changes that they have. But I have so many good stories of when self-advocacy has gone well. I had a client who she had a major injury in the 90s, and I met her in the 2010, maybe 2015 range, and she had not stepped foot into a bank. She had a lot of post-traumatic stress related to revealing that she had a brain injury. Her job at the time was completely dependent on them not knowing anything. She did not have an understanding boss, and she had a very abusive boss, and she was a single mother. So losing her job was everything to her. So she had masked her deficit for a long time, but she couldn't make change for $1. So walking into a bank, she just avoided it completely, had no idea what her finances looked like, never looked at her credit card statements. Who knew if there were fraudulent charges on there? She had no idea. She also purchased the same outfit 3 times because she would forget she had purchased an outfit. So we sat down and we talked. And I said, what do you need to get out of a banking situation? What do you need to learn? And what do you need to understand? So we sat down and made a goal of, she wants to understand how to look at her bank statement. She wants to understand how to get alerts if there is a charge over a certain amount. And we set all of these goals together. And then I said, all right, well, what's going to be hard in this situation? What do you need? And she said, I need them to write things down. I'm not going to remember.
When you say them, you mean the bank
people. So as she goes in, we were going to meet with a manager. And so she was saying that she needed them to write the information down. She also needs them to speak slowly because she's anxious. The situation, she needs those words to slow down so that she has time to process what they're saying. And she needed a couple other little accommodations. And then I asked her the big ticket item. I said, are you going to be willing to tell them that you have an injury that means you have these accommodations? And she was extremely anxious. And I told her, because we didn't know who we were walking into a room to meet. We didn't know if we were going to meet someone who would be willing to hear this information, or if we were going to walk into a room and have someone who would just be very dismissive and wouldn't listen to her needs. And so we decided that we would walk in, and she was okay with me first saying that I was her friend. She did not want me to disclose I was her therapist. I could go in and say that I was her friend, and she wanted me to scout out someone that I felt was trustworthy and asked to meet with them in that situation. So she trusted me enough to pick out that person. So she decided that if I found the right person and I gave her a head nod, she would disclose her situation. So we went into a bank her first time in I don't know how many years, and I found the right person. And I gave her a very confident head nod. And so we sat down in a room, and she said, hi, my name is, and these are the needs that I have so that I can be successful today because I have a brain injury. And this lady was a gift from heaven. I cannot tell you how I got goosebumps the day that I met her. She not only sat down and explained all of the banking situations to my client, she then personally checked her account weekly to make sure that there were no fraudulent charges and there were no overdraft fees, because this lady had been paying an obscene amount of money in overdraft fees because she never looked at her bank statement. And this was an amazing success story where this lady did this for a very long time. My client has come so far since then. She's highlighting her credit card statements now. Like, she doesn't have that fear and anxiety, but that advocacy with the right person changed her life when it came to finances.
Gosh, what a beautiful story. It brought tears to my eyes. I think I know the person you're talking about, and she is different because of the advocacy that you've worked on with her. And she's doing so many things that she would have never done before.
And that's the sky's the limit. Once you're able to say, these are my needs, someone's able to help you, because guess what? You get to master that skill, or you get to master that situation, and then you step up on that. That's the foundation for the next step, so that you are moving ahead and you're climbing up in life and you're doing what you want to do. Because ultimately, these are hard conversations to have. I cannot tell you how long it took for us to decide that she would disclose this information and she would advocate for herself there. But because she made that very bold, that very courageous choice, because I know I'm a private person, I would struggle in that situation, but that bold and brave choice, it was just the foundation. And this person is doing so many things that I just adore her, and I get goosebumps thinking about how much she's changed.
And I think about how those needs don't define you. Just because you have needs that might be different than someone else, it doesn't make you less of a person. It just makes you other. You have other needs. And expressing those needs and expressing your wants and your desires and finding tools to get what you need so that you can be successful is what this is all about.
Well, in every disclosure that you make to a person, the next person that they talk to who might be a little other or a little different, or something is just, they don't quite understand them, you might have given that person one nugget of understanding that helps the next person. So every time, every single time you advocate for yourself, you're advocating for other people, whether you know it or not. That has a trickle down effect. It's like the butterfly effect, where it can keep going and going and have ramifications in a good way in places and people that you'll never even meet.
Absolutely. And again, I think emphasizing having someone to help you through this process. And I can imagine that you did a lot of role playing and that you practiced this, you practiced what you were going to say, and that you prepared her.
Well, and it's foundational, just like I did with my children, where we talk it through. We go through this situation. And with this lady, knowing her anxiety level, she's brilliant and intelligent. And so we went ahead and said, well, what if this happens? What would we do? And so we came up with different scenarios. We probably spent a month of going through the scenarios and role playing it. And I never pushed her. This had to be her choice. And that's very important, is you're in control of your information and what you disclose, but knowing that when you disclose that you can make some magic happen with that. And I think you've had some situations where you've tried to encourage clients to share, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, it's true. I think the alternative, if you don't disclose, is you either avoid that situation, like she avoided the bank for so long, or you have a bad experience. And I had a client that wanted to buy a car, and I really encouraged this client to disclose that she was a veteran with an injury, and she didn't want to. She was very successful and had a really prestigious job prior to her injury. And she wanted to maintain that identity. She was not ready to let go of that being who she still was. And while she was still that person, she had needs that she needed to advocate for. And instead of advocating for herself, she really got taken advantage of at this car dealership. So much so that we got multiple people involved and the manager, and we ended up advocating for her and helping her advocate for herself. But this was a situation with, even though she was taken advantage of because she wanted to do it her way, which I respected, she needed help. And even in that situation, she wasn't able to have the conversations. And I wanted her to have the conversations, but she was so defeated that she got taken advantage of that it took having trusted friends and a therapist to step in and help her and advocate for her. So sometimes as a family member, they might not be ready to advocate for themselves, and you might have to step in with permission. And that was that situation. And what she learned is it's better to disclose. And once there was this understanding, the dealership said, why didn't you tell us this at the beginning? We would have done this and we would have given you this special deal for veterans. And like there was opportunity for her to have had success. But I think the message here is we're not always going to get it right. And we learn. Every opportunity is an opportunity to learn. It's not necessarily a mistake. And I think that opportunity that she went through is going to help her in the future advocate for herself and make sure that she does have that trusted person and she does kind of think through this and not just decide one day I'm going to go buy a car.
And that's not a failure. That was a learning opportunity for her, because that her life doesn't end in that car deal. That was a learning step. So that was another step in a foundation of learning that she needed to be able to do that. But she also had safe people for advocacy. She had you. And so she knew when it went wrong that you were safe, and she would, and I'm sure as a military veteran, there's probably a lot of pride in someone. And so going through and admitting that this mistake or this situation happened and having you come in and help her, I think that's huge, is building your safe people to bounce ideas off of, but have them help you when you really do need that help, and you can't just do it alone all the time.
Yeah, she actually had a lot of powerful people that came to her rescue, and she's an incredible person, so she had a lot of incredible people supporting her. I also think about my children and their allergies. So from the time they start talking, I have kids that are allergic to eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, sunflower, sesame, kiwi, mango, shellfish, chickpeas, legumes. I mean, you name it, someone is allergic to it in my house. And so teaching the kids from the beginning to have those conversations with, I'm allergic to this, and telling their friends and their teachers and the parents of the kids, and really helping them. I am confident that my kids are safe in the world. They are safe going to camps. They are safe going to restaurants. They are safe going to friends' houses because they know how to read labels. They know how to ask questions. And in the world of allergies, we have had so many situations where someone says, oh no, there's no egg in that. Okay, can I see the label? I need to see the label. I need to know. I need to talk to your manager. I need to know what bakery you get it from. And you have to ask probably 5 or 6 questions, and then you have to explain to them, do you understand that if I eat this, I'm going to the emergency room? I'm like, oh, like it's not that they don't want to help you. They just don't understand the seriousness of it.
Well, and I think that kind of leads into the next section of this talk, is the skills that you need for self-advocacy. And the one that you were talking about there is developing the self-confidence and being assertive with the information you're trying to convey. Because if you are needing to communicate information, people need to know, like you did, where this is a serious situation. And you need to project that information. You need to be able to communicate facts about it, letting them know that I know some people say they have allergies and there's some people who have sensitivities, but this is a serious thing in our family. And having the confidence to communicate that as an adult can be hard. And building that up in your kids is such a beautiful thing for me to see, is when people can say, no, stop, and ask those serious underlying questions when they're doing that.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to, I'm not trying to knock bubble parents, but my kids are allergic to everything. So if they sat at a peanut-free table, they'd still have eggs that they were exposed to, and sesame and all these other things. And so when parents know that I am an allergy mom, and they come up and like, oh, that's so great. Can you believe they served whatever at the whatever? And they want the school system, and they want everyone to like cater to their child. The minute you walk in Target, someone had a peanut butter jelly sandwich and picked up the same thing you just touched. The world is not a safe world. So really, when it comes to allergies, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to disabilities, when it comes to differing abilities, the world is a adventure, and it's not always safe for everybody. So it really is important for us to practice those skills very early on, as early as we can, and advocating for those little things so that when you have to advocate for those big things, you have developed the skills to do that.
Absolutely. And I think going through, and allergies sometimes are very easy to know exactly what you're advocating for. No egg does this to me. But for some of our clients who have mental health issues or a brain injury, it's a lot harder sometimes to be self-aware enough to know what to advocate for. And so I know in some of the tools that I have used with some of my clients to build this self-awareness is doing some journaling, making sure that you can write down what's going on in your life. Even if they can't identify what the problem was, they bring that journal to me. We read it, and I can say, oh, I see these could be 3 different triggers in that day. What do you think about these 3 different ideas? And we can discuss that as a process. So being self-aware doesn't have to be just you doing that. That could also be you working with a trusted person or a therapist to do that journaling or any of that symptom tracking kind of stuff.
And you've developed some symptom tracking logs that we can make available in the show notes that are really incredible tools for knowing yourself and your situation and your needs, also you develop something that is helpful when you go into a medical professional office.
Yeah, we do a couple of different things for the medical professional office. One, I do have a self-advocacy letter. And the idea behind that is I don't feel like everyone always can easily identify on their own what issues are. So instead, this gives you a checkbox so you can say, oh, light sensitivity, yes or no? Oh, do I get overwhelmed and when people talk too quickly, yes or no? So those kind of questions allow you to think about it and have a cue of just it's yes or no. And it's not having to think about what are the challenges I have. Is this a challenge? Is that a challenge? And that can be really helpful. And then going through the next boxes, I always tell my clients, we only identify these weaknesses, but it's to empower you to overcome them. I would never talk about a challenge without us coming through and saying it's for a purpose and it's so that it's not a challenge for the rest of your life. So then we go through and we have check boxes for, would it help you if they turned the lights off in the room? Would it help you if they wrote that down? Would it help you if they spoke more slowly? And we go through just tons of different scenarios of easy accommodations that people can make for you. And using that checkbox and being able to hand that piece of paper to someone allows you to communicate in a nonverbal way. And I think this can be a very simple way to get started in your own advocacy is write it down, email it, write it down, text it, write it down, print it out, hand it to someone. And having that as a way to non-verbally communicate if you're overwhelmed can be really essential for people.
Absolutely. I think about how nervous you get when you're in a doctor's office, and also maybe you've been waiting 45 minutes and then they come in and you feel rushed and the doctor feels rushed and everyone's kind of in a stressful situation. And then they ask you, okay, have you had any recent falls? And you're like, no. And then you're like, wait, no, I did, and you're just not remembering correctly because you're under a stressful situation. So if you've done that work and you have that checklist in front of you, maybe you have 2 copies and you say, do you mind going over this? Or you fax it ahead of time so the doctor has time to look at it. What a great tool.
Yeah, and the other tool that we do is actually a medical questionnaire to go through because there are so many people who get really overwhelmed, like you just said. You go into the doctor's office, you're already burned out by the time you figured out what were the right clothes to wear. You got in a car, cars are scary, you're overwhelmed by the car. Then you sit in there and there's a million people talking in the waiting room. Your doctor's late, you're now sitting there for 30 minutes. You're completely overwhelmed and you can't actually answer the questions the doctor had. So it's a version of self-advocacy is writing down all the symptoms that you have. So we also have, and we'll put it in the show links, a medical question visit list where it goes through and asks common questions for you to fill out in advance with the goal of advocating for yourself and telling your doctor, these are your needs. And it goes through and says, what else would you like for your doctor to know? What is your goal of today's visit? What do you want to get out of this for your doctor? And then if you have 2 copies of that and you hand one to the doctor can silently read that and then ask you questions. So he doesn't ask you 50 questions in a visit. He reads the information you gave.
Or she reads.
Yes.
We say
Yes.
We say that because I think we're thinking of a client and a specific doctor.
Yeah.
The reason why we're saying he is because there's a doctor that we sat in multiple times and we basically wrote down all the questions he asked in the order that he asked them to create this form. So both of us are thinking of this particular male doctor as we talk about this, but he or she.
Yes, I am usually very conscientious of that. Yes. So I am thinking of a very specific doctor that we have done this process with, but it's been life-changing for visits for him because he actually now knows what the clients are really experiencing and he's not getting the numb answers. I think my clients get really numb because they're just trying to power through and they get the yes, it's okay. Okay.
And before this advocacy tool, we would say, okay, did you mention this? Did you mention? No, I forgot. Even if we had written it down. Mm-hmm. So key for us at where we work is to fax it ahead of time.
Yes. We fortunately have developed those relationships that we are able to do that now, but it also helps us build a relationship with new doctors too, who for clients that we may not know those doctors in the same way as we know that gentleman doctor that I keep referring to. It's very helpful to be able to and send that to them in advance as well. One, they get to communicate with the rehab team. We get to build that circle of trust to help that person's care, but that person filled out that form, and that person can use that to talk to that doctor, and that doctor's going to say, wow, I didn't know any of those things were happening. If I knew, I would have referred you here. We would have taken this medication. And it just helps their care so much to be able to use some of these advocacy tools.
Absolutely. And, we didn't talk about this ahead of time in prepping for this, but case managers, nurse case managers are such great advocates. And it's so important for clients who qualify to have a nurse case manager that they have a really good relationship with them. Some nurse case managers might be appointed by an insurance company, and that might be okay, but everyone in the state of Michigan at least has the right to choose their own case manager, because those case managers also can be really great patient advocates to make sure that the right doctors are on your team, and that you're seeing the right therapists, and that they're documenting your progress to be able to advocate for you so that you can have continued care here in Michigan. And I think insurance companies here are getting more bold in their desire to assign case managers. But just know, if you are here in Michigan and you have an auto no fault injury, you can pick your own.
And I would also encourage everyone to check their health insurance policy and look specifically to see if case management is a covered service. It is not in most policies, but some people do have that as a covered benefit, and it can be life-changing having that professional guide to your care who knows the right questions to ask you and can help you communicate that information.
Absolutely. And even if it's not a part of your policy, if you are in a hospital situation and preparing for discharge, asking to talk to the discharge planner at the hospital, asking to talk to that social worker so that your needs really are communicated and they're considering all of your needs when they're planning your next placement.
Right, absolutely. And I think, we've kind of talked about some of these forms, and that does go a little bit into knowing your audience for self-advocacy. There's different ways we communicate with the audience. If this is my spouse, I probably just have a conversation. All right, I just want you to know I've had a really long day. I'm really tired. I'm going to be coming home in a few minutes, and I need 30 minutes to lay down, and then I want to have a conversation and interact, but can you please just not talk to me for 30 minutes? But for our kids in a school situation, it might need to be a very formal process. But there's also those informal things. We've talked about these two tools, but I also have a client who is autistic, and I want to say that I learned from her that she preferred to be called autistic and not a person with autism. So that was a great learning experience for me. So my autistic client told me she got overwhelmed when she was going into like a hair salon for an appointment because the social interactions were overwhelming. And so we created a card that just said, I am autistic. Conversations are hard for me. Loud noises are hard for me. I need a few minutes to sit alone in a room. And so if she went to an appointment and she got overwhelmed and she felt a meltdown coming, she handed them that card. They would silently walk her into a room, and she had time to sit in a room, and she had time just to sit there and decompress and re-regulate for a sensory experience, and then be able to go back and participate. So just a simple little card with a few key phrases from her. We were able to print that, laminate it, keep it in her purse, and she hands that out now whenever she's overwhelmed. And what's so cool is she's used that tool enough. She's not getting overwhelmed so much because she now doesn't have anticipatory anxiety going into appointments because she knows she has a way to handle that stress.
I think you just brought up a point that I remember, and I think it's so important to simplify things. When I had a client that had a difficult time deciding what to order, you look at a menu and you're standing in line and the menu is so long. And if you have visual issues, the words just start to come together and it's really overwhelming. And so we went and we decided these are the 2 or 3 things that she likes off of this menu at this restaurant. And we did that for multiple restaurants so that when she wanted to order, she just pulled out her little card of what she liked on those menus, and she was able to order because it wasn't so overwhelming. And it's those little things that maybe as therapists, if you're asking the right questions, what do you need? Then you're empowering people to figure out, oh, well, there's a solution for that. And there's a solution to help make ordering and the ability to go out to lunch with friends and enjoy your conversation instead of worrying about what am I going to say when they ask me to order.
And I would say it is really hard to know where to start in this process. Like I said, that very first step of being self-aware is absolutely the hardest step. So I would encourage people to reach out to us at our podcast. If you have questions about where to start in this process, you can always send us an email. You can go to our website and you can do the contact us button, and we can actually have a conversation with you and just kind of give you a few little tips, because I do think that is sometimes the absolute hardest place to start.
Yeah, but you've told so many stories of confidence building. And I think that is so key to self-advocacy, is realizing that disclosing the right amount of information in the right way is a confidence builder.
Because it gives you a good experience, and that sets the foundation for the next good experience. And I do want to say, not every one of these experiences will be perfect, but it's learning from each experience and going back and saying, all right, it wasn't a failure. That one didn't go the way I planned. All right, what didn't work in this situation? What would I do differently next time? Execute that plan. It doesn't have to be one bad situation ends it. It's one negative encounter is a stepping stone and a learning experience to make the next one a good experience.
Absolutely. I hate the word mistake.
No, it is absolutely the worst. There's a great little video from the CEO of Spanx. I love this one, and I share it with my clients a lot. And her dad embraced the word fail. And he would say, well, how did you fail today? Great. That meant that you pushed really hard and you pushed a little past your limits. And so he actually celebrated it. And while I don't necessarily completely agree with celebrating failure, I love the idea of not being afraid to try, which is truly what her dad was going for, was don't be afraid to try. And this is where we try to develop the tools, and we try to plan so much before this advocacy encounter that it feels like you've done it 100 times and you're just doing it again. And that's the goal, is just making it feel pretty comfortable and confident.
Absolutely. So what are some ways you can utilize the support you have so that you don't feel alone in this process?
I think a little bit can be role playing. And role playing in this context is saying, all right, we're going to walk into the bank. All right, I'm going to pretend to be the bank teller. You start the conversation with me. Start with these words and do it. And then I will pretend to be the bank teller, and that gives a real world where she kind of knows what I might say, but it has to make her think on her feet, and it makes the client have to go through and formulate those responses. But we do it more than once. I always role play a minimum of 3 times, and I do it differently each time because I don't want someone I'm working with to think that that's the only way it can go.
So it goes right, it goes wrong, it goes different than planned.
And just being able to think on your feet. And then I always ask permission for my clients too. And this is building that ally, having that ally who might be able to go with you so that you have someone there. And I ask so many questions before I walk in the room with someone. Do you want me to say I'm your therapist? Am I your friend? Am I your cousin? Am I your granddaughter? What do you want me to speak up at any point? Do you want to have a code word? And so usually my code is generally, my client is supposed to touch me if they need something. If I feel like my client might be overstepping a little bit or might disclose some information that might not be safe for them, they know I'm going to put my hand on their shoulder. And that's my silent cue of pause for a second. And then they know that I get their permission to speak up in that situation. So I think developing an ally, discussing how you want that relationship to go if they're going in with you in a situation. And then educating your ally in advance, letting them know that, oh, okay, this is what I'm planning to say, this is my goal, and this is what I need them to do, so that they can help you if they see that your goal is not being met. Maybe you're getting fatigued or tired or something's happening. They can come in with your permission and help finish that process with you.
And having an audible, deciding, you know what, we're going to try this, and we're also going to retreat. It's not the right time. Right. Having, sometimes things happen that you weren't planning on. you plan on going to the mall and getting your computer fixed, and you go to the mall and there's some big concert in the middle of the mall and it's loud. And sometimes the best tool is to listen to yourself and retreat. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Set yourself up for success, making sure that you are prepared with the rehearsal, that you're prepared with a good night's sleep. Like, set the foundation for a good encounter. And it's okay to say, wow, today was really hard. That would set me over the edge if I planned this event to do today. And it's okay to say, I'm not doing that today. This is something that I am going to do another day, and tackling it on a day that you are ready and planning it. This kind of goes back to some of those other concussion things we've spoken about. Set yourself up for success. Do it in the good time of the day. Like, if you know that you're good in the morning, plan to do this encounter in the morning, and then rehearse this encounter. Have your allies there with you, or have them rehearse it with you enough that you feel comfortable enough going in there. Go to the space a little bit early. Sit there. Get yourself comfortable in the space. Learn the environment so you're not just walking in and like rushing through that process. Sit, let your heart rate come down before you start that interaction. There's so many little tips and tools you can do to build that comfort zone first, and you set yourself up for that good encounter.
Yeah, and you talk about setting yourself up. I think there are a lot of organizations out there, and there's a lot of information out there on self-advocacy and your legal rights, and making sure that you plug into those avenues that are there for you. In Michigan, we have Michigan Rehab Services that really works to help people develop employable skills that might have needs that need to be met before they can return to vocational employment. They also are great advocates for accessibility needs and different special circumstances that might need to be employed. And I think that knowing what your legal rights are and knowing what advocacy organizations are in your area are really important to help you develop those tools and that confidence to say, no, I am entitled to this, and this is how I'm going to pursue it.
Yeah, knowledge is power. Know your rights. Finding the right organization. I know I have gone to the ACLU website to look up workers' rights when I have clients interviewing for new jobs. If you have a specific diagnosis, the Brain Injury Association of Michigan, we have an amazing branch, but there's the Brain Injury Association of America. There are organizations if you are deaf. There are organizations if you are autistic. So there's so many different groups, and that's because we know that if we work together, we can make great things happen. So research who are the great groups for your needs, and you could actually email them. I actually reach out all the time. I had a client who moved to Arizona, and I knew she would need support. She would need medical professionals who understood TBI. She had a really high pain levels, and she would need very specific services. So before she moved, we reached out to the Brain Injury Association of Arizona. We asked them to recommend physicians in her area. We asked them to recommend people for pain management. We asked them to recommend all types of disability services and supports that she would be able to get as someone who was low income with a disability. And so before she moved, she already had appointments set up with people who would understand her. And she had a network that she moved into. And you can do that even if you're not moving, but that gives you an example of how just reaching out to that organization gave us so many people for her to connect with on day one who would potentially understand her needs.
Absolutely. And there's Facebook groups. There are so many Facebook groups that I have researched, and I'm not members of a lot of them, but I'm members of some of them. And it's so insightful to be a part of an organization or a group that has a similar need and a similar focus, and the ability to say, hey, I'm having a bad day. This is what's going on. These are my symptoms. Anyone relate to that? And to have all this support and ideas come through this.
I think that is a really great point. Social media can be wonderful for connecting people. It can act like a support group. I would caution people to make sure that you're staying safe and not disclosing personal information. So if you need someone to help you understand that piece of it, make sure you stay safe when you're disclosing things. Don't list all of where you live or a lot of personal information, but you can talk about scenarios or say, I'm trying to get a job. What would my rights be? Or who should I connect with? Because there's so many brilliant people out there who have had injuries, who have been fighting the good fight, who would be able to help you and would be happy to help you and could support you.
Yeah. And I guess you bring up a great point. Maybe don't click on some of the links if people are emailing you. Don't give out your email. Keep it very neutral. Maybe don't friend them, but be a part of a group that is helping you stay connected.
Absolutely. I think that is huge, is people who understand you from a personal level, because I understand as a therapist, but I personally have been fortunate enough that I haven't had a brain injury. So while I speak from working with people for a long time in that situation, I don't have that same perspective that someone else might be able to do for you online in those support groups or even in-person support groups. I know the Brain Injury Association does in-person support groups here.
Absolutely. So I think before we close, I have a question. Is there ever a time where we might not disclose our disability, or we might not want to talk about some of our issues that we're having?
You don't have to disclose. I think you and I are saying that there's power in speaking up and saying these things, but you 100% do not have to. That's where it goes to knowing those legal rights. You and I were talking earlier before the podcast about jobs and applications. And do you have to disclose that you have a disability, even if you need accommodations at this job that you're applying for? And the answer is no. You do not have to disclose. If you think that disclosing would hurt you in any way, don't do it. You are not obligated. When we talk about disclosing, this is an act of empowerment in a situation that we know that it has a high probability of helping you. But you do not need to disclose in every single situation.
Right. And I would encourage you to really research that. If you're going to get a job, maybe talk to a job coach and research what your rights are, and maybe some things that you might choose to disclose, because there is some power in disclosing. If you are a college student and you've overcome different disabilities, that maybe shows your strength and your character and your perseverance, and it isn't going to impact your job or your job performance, then maybe you do choose. But I think seeking some advice before you have a job interview is really important, to talk about your specific needs and your specific situation, so that you're not disclosing something that really might end up being a situation where they discriminate against you, and they shouldn't, because there's no reason that your needs are going to affect your job performance.
Absolutely. And I think you have a great story of a good friend of ours who you guys did a podcast together. We can link that podcast in the show links, of a success where speaking up, telling her story, advocating for herself went really, really well.
Yeah, I will try and keep this short and sweet. But for 9 years, she masked her deficits, and she really was afraid to do anything. And she didn't have that trusted person that she could go through this self-advocacy with until we met. And it was work in progress. It was many years in progress. But just recently, she was ready to tell her story. So mind you, she hadn't told her story to anyone. And even her own children didn't know the depth of her story. Even her own family members didn't know the depth of her story. Even her closest friends didn't know the depth of what she was going through. And she pushed a lot of people away in the process, because this avoiding my deficits means I'm going to avoid anything that might highlight my deficits. And so she let a lot of friendships go. And I think her friends thought, oh, well, maybe I did something to offend her. Maybe she just doesn't like me anymore. And none of that was the case. It's just that she was protecting herself so much by pushing others away. So she finally made the decision to tell her story, and friends came out left and right. That podcast in 8 days had 1,500 views. And it was just incredible that she was able to tell her story, and the power that came from that, and the amount of people that have reached out to her. Just yesterday, she said, I just met with 3 more people for lunch, and we started at 2:00 in the afternoon and we didn't leave till 7 p.m. And just the connections that she was able to make with people that she had shut out of her life for so long because they just didn't understand her needs was incredible. And so there is power in advocating, power in the ability to retain relationships. There are special people in your life that want to stay in your life. And if you give them the information that they need to help you through these situations, then you don't have to push them away.
I also want to say our friend did that afraid. It was not an easy choice or even an easy day when she recorded that podcast. And the light in her eyes and the joy that I've seen since she decided to do that, and she was insanely brave, it has blossomed. She has blossomed. And it is just, it's a perfect little cherry on top for our friend who's just come so far.
And you know what? We practiced that. So we actually set up a recording studio at the clinic and had 3 hours of recording with Jason, and he was recording and asking us questions. And when she played that back, some of the questions that she answered, she was so shocked. And she's like, I don't like my facial expression in that. I don't like this. I want to tell it again, because now that I've told it once and I see my reaction, I don't want to look that way because I don't feel that way anymore. But discussing her story and discussing the pain that she was in for 9 years before she met me put her in such a sad place that she was in this sadness while telling it. And so practicing telling your story over and over, and we also went through the questions. We spent 8 or 10 hours practicing it back and forth, even after we recorded it. And so it's going to take time to tell your story, but you can practice telling small parts of your story to special people that you can trust.
And I really look forward to having her on our show more. I think she's going to be a piece of magic every single time she comes on, because she gives that very personal, very real perspective, but it also inspires hope, because she came so far, and she works with us in our clinic, our friend Shirley, and every single client lights up if you say her name, because she has spoken to almost every client. She has now been empowered to share her story. Her story is now empowering them and giving them hope that they will overcome their challenges. And it's just like a beautiful cycle that just keeps fueling, and so many other people, they benefit so much from her. And I think the world of her and her bravery for telling that story.
Absolutely. She is the perfect example of self-advocacy. And I think in honor of our friend Shirley, I will say, to end our podcast, be courageous, move forward in your day with hope, joy, and purpose. Thanks for joining.
While we love what we do and are as passionate as they come, the information on this podcast and discussion is for educational purposes only and should not replace professional medical advice. Please consult your own healthcare provider if you are seeking medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment for you or anyone else. We do our very best to provide correct information, but please understand science and medicine is ever-changing. We welcome feedback, comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. This disclaimer applies to any guest or contributors to the podcast or blog.